The words came out of his mouth during an argument with his wife, and the moment he said them, he froze. "I promised I would never leave you. I made a vow a long time ago." She stared at him, confused, because they had only been married for 3 years. But he felt the truth of those words in his bones, in his soul, in a place deeper than memory. He had made a promise, not in this lifetime, somewhere else, sometime long ago, and that vow was still binding him, still shaping his choices, still directing his life in ways he was only beginning to understand. His name was David, and he had always felt an unusual pull toward commitment. While his friends dated casually, moved from relationship to relationship without much thought, David couldn't do that. Every relationship felt sacred to him, felt like it carried weight and consequence beyond the present moment. And when he met Rachel, when their eyes locked across a crowded room at a mutual friend's party, he knew instantly that this wasn't a casual meeting. This was significant. This was destiny. This was the fulfillment of something that had been set in motion long before either of them was born. They married quickly, much faster than their families thought wise, but David couldn't explain the urgency he felt, the absolute certainty that Rachel was the person he had been searching for his entire life. And in the beginning, everything was perfect. They understood each other in ways that seemed impossible for two people who had just met. They finished each other's sentences, anticipated each other's needs, moved together like dancers who had been practicing the same routine for years. But then the problems started. Small things at first: David's intense need to always know where Rachel was, to make sure she was safe, to protect her from any possible harm. Rachel found it sweet initially, then suffocating. She needed space, needed independence, needed to breathe, but David couldn't give her that. The thought of her being out of his sight for too long filled him with a panic he couldn't explain or control. It was like some part of him believed that if he wasn't watching over her constantly, something terrible would happen. The arguments grew more frequent. Rachel accused him of being controlling, of not trusting her, of treating her like a child who couldn't take care of herself. David tried to explain that it wasn't about trust, that it was about something deeper, something he didn't understand himself. But he had no words for what he was feeling, no way to make her understand that this was uncoming from his conscious mind, but from some ancient place in his soul that remembered things his waking self had forgotten. That's when the words slipped out during one particularly heated fight. "I promised I would never leave you. I made a vow a long time ago." And Rachel, frustrated and exhausted, shot back, "What are you talking about? We've only been married 3 years. What vow? What promise?" And David, hearing his own words, realized he didn't know. He had no memory of making such a promise in this lifetime. Yet he felt the absolute truth of it resonating through his entire being. Rachel suggested therapy, thinking maybe David had some unresolved childhood trauma that was manifesting as relationship anxiety. They went to a counselor who specialized in marriage and family issues. The counselor was helpful to a degree, teaching them communication skills and boundary setting, but none of it addressed the core issue. David still felt this overwhelming compulsion to protect Rachel, to never let her out of his sight, to fulfill some obligation he couldn't name or explain. After several months of traditional therapy with little progress, their counselor suggested something unusual. She had recently attended a conference where she learned about past life regression therapy and its effectiveness in treating relationship patterns that seemed to have no origin in the current lifetime. She was careful to present it as just one option among many, and she made it clear she wasn't personally trained to facilitate such work. But she gave them the name of a therapist who was a woman named Dr. Ellen, who had been doing regression work for over 20 years. David was skeptical but also desperate. His marriage was falling apart, and he could feel Rachel pulling away more each day. He loved her more than he thought it was possible to love another human being, and the idea of losing her filled him with a terror that went beyond normal heartbreak. It felt like losing her would be losing a part of his own soul. So he made the appointment, telling himself he would try anything if it meant saving his marriage. Dr. Ellen's office was different from what he expected. It wasn't clinical or sterile. It was warm and inviting, with soft lighting and comfortable furniture and walls lined with books about consciousness, spirituality, and the nature of the soul. Dr. Ellen herself was in her 60s, with gentle eyes and a calm presence that immediately put David at ease. They talked first about his relationship with Rachel, about his childhood, about his family background. Dr. Ellen asked specific questions about his fears, about what exactly he thought would happen if he let Rachel have more freedom. David struggled to articulate it. I just feel like if I'm not there, if I'm not watching over her, something terrible will happen, like I'll lose her, like she'll be taken from me. Dr. Ellen nodded slowly. And has anything in your current life given you reason to believe this? Has Rachel ever been in danger? Has she ever been hurt when you weren't around? David shook his head. No, nothing like that has ever happened. That's why I know it's irrational. But knowing it's irrational doesn't make the fear go away. Dr. Ellen explained that. Sometimes fears and compulsions that have no basis in our current life experience come from previous lifetimes. She described how the soul carries memories and lessons and unresolved issues from one incarnation to the next, and sometimes, especially when souls incarnate together in multiple lifetimes, patterns and promises from those previous lives can bleed through into the present, affecting behavior in ways the conscious mind doesn't understand. She asked if David would be willing to try a regression session to see if they could find the source of this overwhelming need to protect Rachel. David agreed, both nervous and curious about what he might discover. Dr. Ellen explained the process, how she would guide him into a deep state of relaxation where his subconscious mind could access memories beyond this current lifetime. She assured him he would be safe, that he could stop at any time if he felt uncomfortable, and that she would be there guiding him through whatever he found. They began. Dr. Ellen's voice was soothing and rhythmic as she guided David to close his eyes, to focus on his breathing, to allow his body to relax completely. She walked him through a progressive relaxation technique, starting with his toes and moving up through his body, releasing tension from each muscle group. David felt himself sinking deeper and deeper into the comfortable chair, his awareness shifting from the external world to the vast internal landscape of his consciousness. Dr. Ellen asked him to imagine a hallway with many doors, each one leading to a different lifetime, a different memory. She told him that his higher self, his soul, already knew which door to open, which lifetime held the information he needed to understand his current fears and compulsions. She asked him to trust his intuition and move toward whichever door he felt drawn to. In his mind's eye, David saw himself walking down this hallway. Most of the doors were closed, but one near the end was slightly open, light spilling out from the crack. He moved toward it, feeling both drawn and apprehensive. When he pushed the door fully open and stepped through, everything changed. The therapist's office disappeared, and he found himself somewhere completely different. He was standing in a street, but not a modern street. The ground beneath his feet was cobblestone, uneven and worn smooth by countless footsteps over many years. The buildings around him were made of stone and timber, with thatched roofs and small windows with shutters but no glass. The air smelled of wood smoke and animals and something cooking, probably stew or bread. People moved around him wearing simple clothing, tunics and cloaks and rough woven fabrics. This was a medieval village, he realized, somewhere in Europe, maybe England or France, though he wasn't sure how he knew that. Dr. Ellen's voice came from somewhere distant, asking him to look down at himself, to see what he was wearing, to notice his body. David looked down and saw rough brown pants and a simple shirt, well-worn boots. His hands were bigger than his current hands, more calloused and scarred. He was a man, probably in his late 20s or early 30s, strong and healthy despite the hardness of the life he lived. Dr. Ellen asked him his name. David hesitated, then felt the answer rise from somewhere deep inside. William, he said, his own voice sounding strange to his ears. My name is William. She asked what year it was. Another pause, another pull from the depths of memory. It's 1347, he said. The year of our Lord, 1347. The words came easily, naturally, as if he had said them 1,000 times before. Dr. Ellen asked him to look around, to notice what was happening in this village, to see what was important in this moment. William turned slowly, taking in the scene. The village was busy with normal daily life. People working, talking, children running through the streets. But there was an undercurrent of tension he could feel, a worry that hung in the air like smoke. People were talking in hushed voices about something, about news from the east, about sickness, about death coming. And then William saw her, a young woman standing in the doorway of a small house, watching him with a smile that lit up her entire face. David's heart lurched because he recognized that smile. It was Rachel. Not exactly Rachel as she looked now, but the same soul, the same essence. the same energy he would recognize anywhere across time and space. Her name in this lifetime was Catherine, and she was his wife. He moved toward her, feeling the love that William felt for Catherine, and it was the same love David felt for Rachel, deep, consuming, eternal. Catherine reached out and took his hand, pulling him inside the small house that was their home. It was simple, just one main room with a fire pit in the center, a table, a few stools, a bed in the corner. But it was theirs, and it was filled with the warmth of their love for each other. Dr. Ellen asked William to move forward in time, to see what happened next in this life. The scene shifted. Days or weeks had passed. David wasn't sure, but everything had changed. The village was no longer busy and normal. It was quiet, eerily quiet, with an atmosphere of dread and fear. William was in his house, and Catherine was lying in the bed, sick. Very sick. David felt William's terror as he looked at his wife. She was burning with fever, her skin pale and covered in dark spots that looked like bruises. She was barely conscious, mumbling words he couldn't understand. And William knew what this was. The sickness people had been whispering about. The death that was coming from the east. The plague. The Black Death. It had reached their village, and now it had taken his wife. He sat beside her, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth, praying to God and every saint he could name to spare her. He hadn't left her side in days, refusing to eat or sleep, just watching over her with desperate hope that she would recover. But deep down, he knew she wouldn't. He had seen what this sickness did. He had watched neighbors and friends die horrible deaths, and now it was taking the one person he loved more than his own life. Dr. Ellen's gentle voice asked what was happening, asked William to describe his feelings. David, speaking as William, choked out words thick with emotion. I can't lose her. I won't leave her. I promised her when we married that I would always protect her, always be by her side, that nothing would ever separate us. I have to save her. I have to. But he couldn't save her. The scene moved forward, and David watched through William's eyes as Catherine's condition worsened. She stopped responding to him, stopped opening her eyes, her breathing becoming shallow and labored. William held her hand and wept, begging her not to leave him, promising anything if she would just stay. He made vows to God, promised to give up everything he owned, to spend the rest of his life in service to the church, to do anything if only Catherine could live. But the vows made no difference. Catherine died as the sun was setting, her hand growing cold in William's grasp. Her chest no longer rising and falling with breath. William howled with grief, a sound of anguish so deep and primal that David felt it echo through his own chest centuries later. He held her body and rocked back and forth, refusing to accept that she was gone, refusing to let go. Dr. Ellen asked gently what happened next. David saw through William's eyes as men came to take Catherine's body. They were rough, frightened, wearing cloth over their faces to protect themselves from the sickness. They told William he had to let go, that the body needed to be burned immediately to prevent the plague from spreading further. William fought them, desperate to keep holding on to his wife, but they were stronger and more numerous. They pried his fingers from Catherine's body and carried her away. William followed them to the edge of the village where a massive fire was burning, where the bodies of plague victims were being thrown into the flames. He watched, helpless and broken, as they threw Catherine's body into the fire. And as the flames consumed her, something inside William shattered completely. He fell to his knees and made another vow, this one not to God but to Catherine's departing soul. I will find you again, he swore, his voice raw with grief and determination. In the next life, in whatever form we take, I will find you and I will never leave you. I will protect you. I will keep you safe. I promise. I promise. I swear on my own soul that I will never let anything happen to you again. The scene shifted once more. William himself had caught the plague, probably from the days he spent caring for Catherine without any protection. He was lying in the same bed where she had died, burning with the same fever, his body covered with the same dark spots. But he wasn't afraid of death, he welcomed it. Death meant he could follow Catherine, could be with her again, could fulfill his promise to find her. As William's life ended, David felt the separation of consciousness from body, felt the strange floating sensation of death. But even in death, even as William's soul rose up out of his disease-ravaged body, the vow remained. The promise echoed through his consciousness. I will find you. I will protect you. I will never leave you. It became part of his soul's structure, woven into the very fabric of his being. carried forward across the centuries that separated William's death in 1347 from David's birth in the late 20th century. Dr. Ellen guided David to the space between lives, to the realm where souls go to rest and review after death. David found himself in a place of peace and light, surrounded by loving presences that he understood were his guides and teachers. They showed him the lifetime as William helped him understand the lessons and the love and the loss. They explained gently that the vow he had made, while born from love, had created an energetic attachment that would follow him into future incarnations. They showed him other lifetimes after William's, lifetimes where he had found Catherine's soul again and again, always with the same compulsion to protect, always with the same fear of losing her. In one life, they had been siblings, and he had tried to control her every move out of fear for her safety. In another life, they had been friends, and his overprotective nature had driven her away. The pattern repeated across lifetimes, the vow expressing itself in different forms, but always with the same underlying energy of desperate attachment and fear of loss. The guides explained that Catherine's soul, now Rachel, had chosen to incarnate with him again, in this current lifetime, specifically to help him release this vow. They loved each other deeply across multiple lifetimes, but the vow was no longer serving either of them. It was preventing them from experiencing the kind of healthy, balanced love that allowed both partners to be free and whole. Rachel's soul had agreed to push back against his overprotective behavior, to create enough friction that David would be forced to seek answers, to discover the source of the pattern, and to finally release it. Dr. Ellen asked David if he was willing to release the vow now, to let go of the promise he had made as William over 600 years ago. David hesitated. Part of him wanted to hold on, wanted to keep protecting Rachel, because it felt like the only way to keep her safe. But another part of him, the wiser part connected to his soul's deeper knowing, understood that holding on was actually pushing her away, that the vow made in love had become a chain binding them both, that true love meant trusting, meant allowing freedom, meant releasing control. With Dr. Ellen's guidance, David spoke to William across the centuries. He thanked him for the love, for the devotion, for the pure intention behind the vow. He acknowledged the pain of losing Catherine, the trauma of watching her die, the desperation that had driven the promise. But then, speaking both as David and as his eternal soul, he released it. I released this vow. I released this promise. I understand now that I cannot protect anyone from death or loss. I understand that control is not love. I understand that my soul and Rachel's soul chose this life together so I could learn to love without fear, to trust without needing to control. I release the vow. I let it go. As he spoke these words, David felt something shift in his chest, like a physical release, like chains that had been wrapped around his heart for lifetimes, suddenly falling away. He felt lighter, freer, more open than he had felt since he was a child. Tears streamed down his face as the grief and fear that William had carried, that David had carried, finally began to dissolve. Dr. Ellen brought him back to the present slowly and gently, counting him up through levels of consciousness, reminding him that he was in the safe office, in his current body, in the present time. When David opened his eyes, he felt different, changed, like he had gone into that session as one person and emerged as someone else, someone who finally understood the invisible forces that had been shaping his behavior. He went home that day and sat down with Rachel. He told her everything about the regression, about William and Catherine, about the plague and the death, and the vow made in grief and desperation. He told her how that vow had been running his life, creating his fears, driving his need to control her every movement. And then he told her he had released it, that he was committed to learning a new way of loving, a way that honored her freedom and autonomy while still honoring the deep connection they shared. Rachel listened with tears in her eyes. She didn't know if she believed in past lives or not, but she believed in David's experience, believed in the transformation she could see in him, and more importantly, she felt something shift in their relationship, like a weight that had been pressing down on both of them had suddenly lifted. The change wasn't instant or magical. David still had to work on his behavior, still had to catch himself when old patterns tried to reassert themselves. When Rachel wanted to go out with friends, and his first impulse was to insist on going with her or to text her every hour, he had to consciously remind himself of the vow he had released. He had to practice trusting, practice breathing through the anxiety, practice letting go. But it got easier. Week by week, month by month, David learned to give Rachel space without feeling like he was abandoning her or failing to protect her. He learned that true protection didn't mean hovering over someone constantly, but rather supporting them in becoming strong and capable in their own right. He learned that love and control were not the same thing, that in fact control was the opposite of love. Rachel noticed the difference. She felt like she could breathe again, could be herself without always worrying about how David would react. And paradoxically, as David released his grip, as he stopped trying to control and protect her every moment, Rachel felt more connected to him than ever. The space he gave her allowed her to choose him freely, to come back to him not out of obligation or suffocation but out of genuine desire. David also did more research into the time and place of William's life. He discovered that 1347 was indeed the year the Black Death reached Europe, that the plague killed millions, that entire villages were wiped out. The details he had seen in the regression matched historical records. The methods of dealing with plague victims, the burning of bodies, the fear and chaos, all of it was historically accurate in ways David couldn't have known consciously. He also learned that vows made at the time of death or in moments of extreme emotion were believed by many spiritual traditions to be particularly powerful, to carry energetic weight that extended beyond a single lifetime. The idea that his vow as William had shaped his behavior as David was consistent with these teachings, and the idea that Rachel's soul had chosen to incarnate with him again specifically to help him release this pattern was also consistent with how soul contracts and soul families were understood to work. Over time, David's relationship with Rachel deepened in ways he hadn't thought possible. Without the vow driving his behavior, without the fear and compulsion, he was able to love her more fully and authentically. He was able to see her as she truly was, rather than as someone who needed to be protected and controlled. And Rachel, feeling free and trusted, opened her heart to him in new ways, sharing parts of herself she had kept hidden when she felt suffocated by his overprotective nature. They talked about the past life, about William and Catherine, about the love that had been strong enough to carry across centuries, but also the lesson that needed to be learned about healthy boundaries and trust. They wondered about other lifetimes they might have shared, other patterns they might be working through, and they committed to doing the work together, to helping each other grow and heal, to honoring the soul connection while also respecting the individual paths they each needed to walk. David also found that releasing the vow affected other areas of his life. He had been holding on too tightly to many things, not just Rachel, his job, his possessions, his ideas about how life should go. He realized the vow had created a general pattern of trying to control everything out of fear of loss, and as he practiced letting go in his relationship, he found it easier to let go in other areas as well. He became more flexible, more able to flow with life's changes, more trusting that things would work out even if he wasn't micromanaging every detail. He thought often about William, about that heartbroken man kneeling by a plague fire making impossible promises. He felt compassion for William, understanding now that the vow had come from a place of love and pain, not from any desire to harm or control. William had been doing the best he could in an impossible situation, trying to make meaning from meaningless loss, trying to maintain some sense of connection to the woman he loved even as death tore them apart. But David also understood that what had been appropriate in one time and context was no longer serving in another. William's vow had been his way of coping with unbearable grief in a medieval world, where death was common and love was often the only thing that made life bearable. But David lived in a different world, a different time, with different challenges and different lessons to learn, and the lesson he needed now was about releasing control, about trusting love without needing to possess or protect, about allowing freedom while maintaining connection. Years passed. David and Rachel's marriage not only survived, but thrived. They had children, built a life together, faced challenges, and celebrated triumphs. And through it all, David carried the awareness of that past life, that vow, that pattern he had broken. It became a touchstone for him, a reminder that we are all carrying more than we know, that our souls have histories that extend far beyond our current memories, and that healing often requires us to reach back into those hidden places and release what no longer serves. He shared his story with others who struggled with similar patterns of overprotection or control in relationships. He helped them understand that sometimes these behaviors come from past life trauma, from vows made in other times and places, from soul memories that are trying to protect us from pain we don't consciously remember, and he helped them understand that these patterns can be released, that we don't have to keep living out the same stories, lifetime after lifetime, that consciousness and choice can break the chains that bind us. Looking back on the moment when those strange words had slipped out during an argument with Rachel, "I promised I would never leave you. I made a vow a long time ago." David felt grateful. Grateful for the mystery that had pushed him to seek answers. Grateful for the regression that had shown him the truth. Grateful for the vow itself, because it had been born from love. And even though it needed to be released, it had also been a demonstration of the eternal nature of soul connections. He understood now that he and Rachel would likely continue to find each other across lifetimes, continue to love each other in different forms and contexts. But hopefully, with this pattern healed, with this vow released, their future incarnations together would be healthier, more balanced, more aligned with the highest good of both souls. They could love without fear, connect without control, and trust the eternal nature of their bond without needing to grasp and hold on so tightly that love itself became suffocated. Subscribe to discover more souls who remembered promises that shaped their lives across time.